Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Edureka session on how is big data transforming retail industry. So let's talk about what are we going to discuss today. So today we are going to give you a broad overview about the introduction about to retail and big data. While you are already enrolled in Edureka programs, you should so the big data context and the concept should not be alien to you. So today we'll also be taking a brief industry-wise approach to a retail, especially in the context of economic aspects as well as the market share related numbers here. And then we will be talking about the data, the importance of data analysis in retail, the complexities that are associated with in retail, especially from a latency perspective. And we'll also be briefly talking about some of the challenges in retail, and this would be followed by use cases, uh, especially of big data in retail and areas where big data is consumed in this industry or the sector. So, so having said this, so let's start with today's session. And so, like I said, so let's start with the first part of what we call as introduction to retail. So here, let's talk about what exactly is retail. So from a definition point of view, retail is something that is a process of selling goods and services to customers and through multiple channels. And when we call channels, it's primarily distribution channels. And since retail is a private domain, it's obviously as a business, it is always for a profit. So now that definition out of the way, let's also look at the definition of what is big data. So while you might be in the context of going through Edureka program, you might have taken into account multiple definitions of big data. So I have tried to attempt one such definition, and I would also like to put on a different probable version of big data here. So so big data, as you know, from a definition point of view, is something, is a collection of data sets that are so large and so difficult to manage or process with the current database systems or traditional processing applications. So therefore, it's altogether a new field which helps in processing uh, all such data. So, but from a simplicity perspective, so I think I would like you might already be aware of the 5 V's associated with big data, which is the context of volume, which is the high amount of data, the veracity or the uncertainty associated with data, the velocity, the speed of aggregation of data or data gets aggregated, the value, which is extracting meaningful data from raw data, and the variety, which is different formats associated with data. So from today's perspective, I think we should look at any data that conforms or displays any of these characteristics of 5 V's can be easily treated as a big data. So now having that definitions out of the way, so let's get into the retail industry from a very broad perspective. I would say a tops down kind of an approach, especially where we talk about the context of market and market size and its impact on economy and so on and so forth. And here we will be talking about from an Indian perspective only. So, so today the Indian retail industry is actually about close to $1 trillion industry. So it was valued at about $950 billion in about 2018, and it's growing at about 13% annually, right? So from by the end of 2020, which is the financial year till about March, it's expected to be about $1.1 trillion big. So so in retail as such, there are different formats which we'll be talking about in next couple of slides. But so primarily there is what we call as an offline retail and an online retail, and also a context of hybrid. So the online retail is here is was primarily growing at about 31%. It's much faster than the overall industry as such, and is expected to be somewhere around close to size of about $60 billion by end of 2020. So from a brick and mortar or the offline retail as we all know it, from that context, that business, that part of that industry is also growing, and it's growing, it's expected to grow about 10,000 to 12,000 crore, or with something like about 2 or 2.5 or 3 billion by the end of uh, this financial year. So while this makes it India as one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets, and that's the reason you have seen lot of foreign direct investments and lot of interest in India's retail sector. So while we say that the industry is about $1 trillion industry, the 75% of the India's retail is actually what we call as unorganized retail. So which is something like what we call as a mom and pop shops or kirana stores and things like that. But the organized retail, which is the biggest part here, is something like lot the retail outlet that has lots of stores, lots of products, and lots of other different aspects associated with it. What we call is organized retail is expected to grow at about 18%, and not grow, but its market share is supposed to be at somewhere around 18%. And similarly, the e-commerce or the online aspects of this business is expected to be the 7% of this business as such. So having said that, so today when we talk of organized retail, so there is the big data cannot escape the context of this, because everything in the organized retail has scale, value, and lot of technology involved in all of its operational and functional areas. So going forward now, let's also quickly talk about the different formats. While we have briefly touched upon this, so like I said, the formats that we look at is primarily what we call as fully digital, hybrid, and a brick and mortar formats. So the fully digital format is basically what we call as a simply only online kind of a business or retail business. Then they don't have any physical stores at all. So there has been a big growth in the online retail contact growth in online retailing as well. That is primarily because you've seen that many categories of products who are which we don't usually buy frequency, and setting up physical stores for them becomes very uneconomical for many of the retailers. So then there are some things like, say for example, spare parts or something like consumables, which are not purchased on a daily basis. All of these businesses are now moving to online rather than having a physical store. So you're also seeing many retail brands that are offering only products, only online products. Since some of the products are not available on the physical stores at all, and they are being offered only online, primarily from an economics and ease of distribution and management perspective. So having defined this digital, so let's also quickly talk about the hybrid channel. So the hybrid channel, as the name itself suggests, is a mix of physical as well as a digital store. So you might be seeing many of the contexts of, you pick up at store or in-store purchases or delivery at home. All of this qualify as a hybrid format. So I think needless to say here, offline retail is something that simply sells, with a physical store at front. So somebody like a Big Bazaar or any other big retail outlet or Reliance or any of those outlets who actually have a physical store where you actually go in, buy your products, put them in the cart, and then as in shopping basket, and then check out. So those are the typical aspects of or the typical formats of retail here. So now that we have defined formats and a bit about the top overview of retail, so let's also talk about retail and data and how they are pretty much related. So as such, data is actually a very integral part of a retail functions, and many of its processes are primarily driven by data. So if you see on this side, there's a diagram. So like I said, most of the processes are driven by data and analytics in retail, be it in the context of products, assortments, or pricing strategies, be it in the context of supply chain, inventory, relationship, or supplier relationships, or in the context of promotion strategies, or even at the context of shopfront or merchandising or day-to-day operations. So each of these can have multiple layers of complexities, which we'll be talking about in next couple of slides. So in this aspect, so large retail businesses have multiple sources or devices that generate petabytes of data, and this data is primarily used for monitoring or mining customer and transactional data to enhance customer experiences and to finding out newer opportunities, especially from an innovation context. And because retail business is constantly improving, trying to improve itself with their value propositions to the customer. So data and analytics actually help retail businesses and people in retail manage what we call as size, scale, and speed required to serve customers better. So in this context itself, so I think it's important to also understand what are the different types of analysis that happen in the retail domain. So there are primarily three different types of analysis, and of course it involves all the aspects of big data here. So the three different types of analysis that you can encounter here is what we call as a customer analysis, internal analysis, as well as external analysis. So when we talk of customer analysis, we're talking of uh, from the context of customer segmentations based on their demographic, geographic, or psychographic profiles, or based on the customer value, as in the customer life cycle value, or trying to understand shopping habits or brand preferences or media habits. So these are some examples of customer analysis that are done in this domain. Similarly, from an external context, it's all external analysis context. It's all about identifying the market size, the stage of the market, the competitiveness in this market, and also from the what are the market trends, or identifying the competitions, availability of substitutes, things like what are the strengths available with competitors, perceptual mapping. All of these aspects come into the external analysis factor. So then there is internal analysis, which is primarily driven by the context of what is the revenue or the sales per square foot, or the stock turnover rates, profitability per product line, and things like that. So then there is also the aspects of distribution, which is also internal to every retail business. It is driven by some of the examples of that are something like identifying the lead times between placing order to delivery, the cost of distribution, efficiency with regard to the intermediaries, and things like that. So having discussed these aspects, let's also quickly discuss what are the different complexities that you encounter in a retail process. So some of these complexities are defined here. So these complexities are basically in the area of product or identifying demand. Then there is supply side challenges because which are directly related with product. And then there are process complexities itself because there are so many aspects, so many processes, and so many verticals. So the process itself has multiple processes are very complex. And then there is a scaling complexity. So let's look at what do we mean by the product or a demand complexity. So typically, if you look at a large format retails or large organized players in the retail, so all of these retail outlets have high number of products or SKU assortments. And with that comes a large context of complexity. So if you look at any retail, so you have, be it offline or online, there are categories, then there are subcategories, then there are departments, brands, variants. All of them leads to coming up with thousands or probably even lakhs of different products that retail has to take care of. So this essentially also contributes to one of the V's which we call, which is driven by volume. So then, of course, we talk about the context of, the availability of the products, the seasonality associated with the products, and hence, because of different aspects, uh, you can find that any retail business, the people are always trying to optimize for costs, optimize with regard to inventory, their fulfillment, and resources to manage processes. And one other thing is that the forecasting and predictive techniques are what is primarily uh, used to identify the demand associated with the product, and therefore their all other downstream activities and processes that are required to fulfill them. So similarly, on the supply side of it, so the supply of products also depends on what we call as a large number of suppliers, and each of these suppliers also have multiple or complex relationships with different retailers and platforms. So, and this kind of relationships actually impact the availability, this pricing, and all of the other downstream activities, which actually result in, uh, uh, performance or fulfillment of transactional or business objectives of a retail. And that's why you will always find many of the businesses, people are always trying to optimize on procurements, of course, the cost, the supply relationship, warehousing, the deliveries, all of these aspects. You will always, the supply side of the people in retail will always be optimizing on these different processes. And of course, there, like I said earlier, forecasting and predictive techniques definitely help them in performing their jobs well. So having said that, so let's also quickly talk about what is complexity in the context of processes. So because most of the large retail businesses has so many touch points, so many assortments or SKUs, and they also have different geographic presence, as in the stores are present in different regions, different cities, different locations, and sometimes, multiple locations within same cities, their supply chain relationships, and as well as the business strategy and the kind of optimizations they need to do for having a seamless fulfillment. So it all of these aspects lead to complexity in the processes itself. So you will might find that in retail some of these processes are way different for one region, or for one product, or one for or for one supplier. So, and it all is driven by probably business strategy, and all of this again, the optimizations are done using different techniques, on which of course involve big data. So planning and implementation here is the key to the retail business, and like I said, data analysis and people are the center of it. So other thing aspects is that all of this analysis associated with data is primarily to help make decision, so help people or the top management or the middle management take their decisions faster and make them uh, identify problems easier. So next we talk about the scaling challenges. So in this context, I think any business who would like to grow would always like to scale up. Scale up in the context of number of stores, be it in the number of categories or products, or be it in the number of customers. So because it actually impacts their top line and bottom line growth. So all of these areas also increase, like I said, all the other complexities. Take into account the complexities of processes, the complexities of product, supply, all of this come into picture now. So in order to seamlessly manage scaling, we actually need a lot of, analytics and data support, big data support, especially for predictive and predictive modeling techniques which are used to help scale the businesses faster. So having said that, I think it's also important to quickly discuss about the latency that is associated in retail and how the retail as a business tries to handle it. So in retail, there is a context what we call as hackathon's view of decision latency. So it is primarily aimed to reduce response latency and minimize the value loss for any so this response latency is what we can be defined as a sum of capture latency, analysis latency, and a decision latency. So if you see a graph on the left hand side here, so the latency in the context of capture would mean that at any point in time, let's say some issue or something that goes wrong on a floor or on the online context. So the amount of time taken to identify uh, that issue and to report it and to make a decision associated with it is directly proportional to the value. So by the time you take it, so if at any point in time, if you have, if you take a lot of time to report that issue itself, and that means that much time you will take to do an analysis and then take a decision based on it. So the value of the loss or the loss that is accounted for based on the for basis of the decision latency can be minimized by capturing all the data points in a fastest possible way. So the compressing this time aspect of it in terms of capture latency or analysis or a decision latency helps the businesses minimize their losses, and therefore they're able to be uh, come back on their feet in a much faster way. So this is the basic concept of latency that most of the retail businesses follow, and hence most of their processes as well are driven to an extent that we have a fastest possible or a real-time decision making capability. Sorry, analysis and decision making capabilities. So let's move on and let's also talk of some of the key challenges in retail today. So some of the key challenges that we look at is in the context of data sources, in terms of managing the data sources and timely adoption and data security. While there might be a couple of many other challenges, but these are we're talking of the top uh, challenges that from a big data and a big data perspective. So I think we already discussed that, in the context of retail, there are multiple applications that are tracking data that where the data is stored. So be it at the context of, point of sale, be it from a marketing or social media level, or be it supply chain level, or be it at, IoT or sensor level. So there are a lot of applications and uh, that are generating petabytes of data actually. So all of this data needs to be stored, managed, and should be made available for analysis. So some of the techniques that are used today in retail are in the context of data warehouses and data lakes. So, so many of the retail businesses look at these techniques or these technologies to adopt for future scaling. So I think quickly, if we can, I know you might be already aware of, but still in the context, we can also define the definition of data warehouse as something as a data storage which aggregates the required data in a very planned way. So whereas data lake is more in the context of a raw repository actually, which only just stores data. It could be raw data or it could be any other unprocessed form of data. So whereas you can see that, I can, in the context of data warehouse is where most of the effort goes, it primarily works on an ETL context or ETL process. So, and it only is able to store the structured data. So here is, whereas in the case of data lake, you can store any type of data, be it structured, semi-structured, or unstructured data, whereas the key difference happens to be the process of ETL process, extract, transform, load process in case of data warehouses, and in case of data lake, it's ELT, which is extract, load, and then transform. So where the transformation happens after the data is already stored in the data lake. So the next context that we talk of in the challenge perspective is the timely adoption. So because many of the data sources are require real time as well as faster response and lesser latencies. So many the times the time required to migrate from one system or one type of database to other database requires a lot of trade-off and analysis, because while the faster the newer technologies allow greater flexibilities, but again go to market and providing value to the customers at a fastest pace is where the trade-off actually happens, and that's where the analysis for risk mitigation happens. So having said that, today most of the data is also comes in the context of many legal laws, especially from the context of security, privacy, and it is important for uh, retail businesses to ensure that the data of a customer and their data itself is fully secure, and so that it's not just from a data health perspective but also from a control perspective. So having said that, so let's also look at some of the use cases that where big data is used in retail. So some of the use cases is something what we call, this is one of the first use case that many of the use cases that the retail big format retail uses. So what we call as a customer behavior analytics. So this is where a lot of users because the user comes in from multiple sources, from multiple channels. So most of the retail businesses actually look out at aggregating all of this data from multiple systems to create one unified view or a one single view of a customer behavior. So this is basically one of the views where you can actually identify who is the user, where is he coming from, how many times has he come, what are the transactions he has done, what is the total customer lifetime value, what is the cost of retention, what is his favorite channel, what is the content that he likes about, what is the sentiment of this user. All of this data is provided for one single view or a unique view of a customer using aggregation techniques, especially taking data from multiple systems. So one of the other use cases that we see here that are used in retail is obviously to predict customer lifetime value. So at any point in time, customer has probably five different stages. So be it in the context of anonymous customer or a lead or something like a customer, somebody who's completed the transaction probably the first time, and then a repeat customer and a high value customer. So the clustering techniques that we used in ML uh, are used very extensively here, and that helps the businesses to identify who are the users in different life cycle stages. And using this data, there are always marketing and sales efforts done to move the user from a uh, life cycle value to probably a higher life cycle value, be it from here to here or here to here. So that's where most of the uses of customer lifecycle value comes in here. So then we also have an aspect where you can actually see personalization to users, be it in store or be it offline. So these are some of the techniques that help the users gain much more proximity, and many of these personalizations with regard to offers, prices, and help the audience move from one customer life cycle stage to a higher customer life cycle value stage. But then there are use cases which uses IoTs, sensors, and beacons, which can help users in-store marketing or in help them with exactly tell them which to part of the store they are in case they are lost, more from a support perspective. Also, it helps them in the context of analytics and for loyalty. So the way some of those implementations work is with the beacon is kind of integrated with the mobile device, and these beacons interact with the SDKs of the mobile device and actually give you the notifications and personalizations in real time. So one of the most popular use cases is what we call as a recommendations engine, which you might have seen in many places like Amazon or Flipkart or mostly online uh, retail context. So you would see the personalizations that are relevant to the users, and you might see them that is based on many of the places is collaborative filtering or many other complex other recommendation techniques. So having said that, there are a lot of areas where retail as such, big data is used in retail as such. So they are primarily in the context of data acquisition, be it in the context of analysis, be it in the context of storage or usage. So big data is used primarily everywhere in this retail. So in the context of data acquisitions, so retail in companies work with structured data, unstructured data. They work on events, different user events. They work with IoTs and different protocols, and of course data streams. And many of the applications actually look out for a real-time data. So from an analysis perspective, so things like stream mining, semantic text analysis, information extraction, linked data analysis, and simple data discovery, semantic word semantics, community data analysis, cross-section analysis. These are different types of analysis. Some of them are external, some of them are internal. All of this analysis are kind of used for a day-to-day operation. From a storage perspective, retail industry uses a lot of different technologies or a combination of different technologies. They use in-memory databases, NoSQL, as well as cloud storage, NewSQL, data, and different. They use different data models here, of course, from for their applications, and they use a lot of these aspects from they primarily look at available the asset properties as well as security and privacy. So from a data usage perspective, of course, it is primarily used from a machine learning techniques are used from for decision support, mostly prediction in use analytics, basically descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, and diagnostic analysis is where they come from. And the data is also used from a simulation and of course from a visualization and data discovery and modeling perspective. So having said this, so we come to the end of this session. Thank you and have a very nice day.